Arc 7, The Land of the Wolves. Chapter 27, The Haves and the Have-Nots. If you're alive, you'll get a chance to clean off your disgrace. But if you die, that's the end. So, I'm going. I won't get into a fight I don't think I can win. There was no lie in those words. Throwing oneself into a fight with little chance of winning was a folly only an unbelievable fool would commit to. He did not believe himself wise, not in the slightest, but for that reason he knew he should approach his decisions carefully. While a wise person might reach a conclusion in an instant, a fool would take an eternity to reach it. Todd knew that this was how those who were untalented waged battle. He did not get into fights he could not win. However, paradoxically speaking, Todd, there's absolutely nothing wrong with getting into a fight you have a chance of winning. He brought his clenched fist in front of his right eye and looked longingly into the distance through the small pinhole he had created. A primitive means of seeing farther, achieved by narrowing one's field of vision. If he squinted, Todd's eyes would be able to see quite far, but he would not be able to make out what was going on inside the chaotic city hall, let alone past the burning flags. And that applied even if the situation had the winds in his favor. Jamal, oi, the roof of the city hall's gone. What's going on? Right next to him, Todd's ferocious companion was overwhelmed by his own growing sense of urgency, creating a ruckus. His concentration was disturbed by the noise, so he flicked his hand towards the man to instruct him to shut up. As for what was going on, he was earnestly evaluating the situation. Todd, pretty sure one of the 9 divine generals has joined. If not, there was no point in staying in the citadel which had fallen into enemy hands. As mentioned before, Todd had considered abandoning the city and fleeing once the city hall had fallen due to the enemy's plan. He had no intention of politely complying with any disarmament order and surrendering. In the first place, as long as the shots were being called by the poster child of war, the man who called himself Natsumi Schwartz, dangerous people like Todd and Jamal would be the first to be dealt with. Even in Wallachia, executions of surrendered prisoners of war were frowned upon, but that man would certainly make up a good reason to excuse such travesties. At least, that was what Todd would do. It was a natural consideration for survival. Hence why he had chosen to abandon the city without hesitation. In spite of this, his curiosity got the better of him, so he hid just close enough to confirm the existence of reinforcements heading for the city. Jamal, there ain't any doubt about it. That's the woman I saw 2 years ago, when I served during the defeat of the barbarians. General First Class Arakia, ranked 2nd. As he peered at the scantily clad woman who had leisurely entered the city by jumping over the closed main gate, Jamal declared those words with a hint of excitement in his snorts. He was the kind of man who walked around with his wild instincts on his sleeve. Both in terms of his strength as a living creature and in his male disposition to be able to gauge females, he wasn't the sort who would forget anyone who tugged at his heartstrings. In other words, one of the strongest among the Empire's 9 divine generals had made their appearance to suppress the rebellion. So this must be the chance that Todd had previously judged to be missing. Even so, Todd, to act or not to act, it's more than worth the trouble. Although Natsumi's tricky tactics were brilliant, he had no direct combat power, at least, not within a third of a soldier's own power. The people of Shudrak who followed him were known for their toughness, but that was only relative to ordinary people. Those who were truly strong, such as the 9 divine generals, were not constrained to such criteria. Even Jamal, whose only claim to fame was his tremendous swordsmanship and fighting prowess, was only about as good as a dozen regular imperial soldiers. That was the measure of how well one could gauge an ordinary person. Members of the 9 divine generals were prime examples of ones who would take care of Jamal. The city hall that had fallen into enemy hands would be reclaimed. Todd, then it's wise to back the winning ground dragon. There was no need to work with a member of the 9 divine generals. All they had to do was to be more useful to the general than the soldiers who had been captured and rendered unable to do their job. If they could detain the enemy, interrogate them, and deliver some proper payback, then the general first class would remember their actions well. If they did that, they would be promoted to a higher position, and may be able to find their way back to the imperial capital sooner rather than later. Todd, alright, we're heading back, Jamal. We're going to help her retake the city hall. Jamal, oh? Oh, yeah. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. I've been itching all over for a while, since running away ain't my style. I ain't gonna let the general first class hog all the credit. Todd, don't be silly. We're going to gain the favor of the general. Todd sighed at Jamal, whose fists hardened in anticipation for a return to battle in response to the change of plans. Setting out for the city hall, they located a position with an optimal view for monitoring the situation, instead of directly entering the building. Following his own beliefs to the last, he was careful and cautious, and Todd, kill him, Arakia. The top floor of the city hall was blown away by gale force wind, the barely visible General First Class on a rampage. From a distance, the second-ranked silver-haired, brown-skinned woman wielded a tree branch that looked like an improvised weapon, and rampaged about as if she were the highest law of the world. Between all the bodies indiscriminately strewn around the hall, there was no distinction between Shadrach and Imperial soldiers. Under these circumstances, the one who stood in front of Arakia with a blue-haired girl behind his back was none other than Natsumi Schwartz. Todd. As soon as he saw him, the thoughts that came to Todd's mind were not dismissive like, how could he be stupid enough to stand in front of a General First Class, or how is he still alive? Rather, with utmost vigilance, Todd shouted out loud in his heart. Kill that man here, for sure, Arakia. Above all else, for better or worse, he did not care what he got credit for. He did not care if the time he spent thinking about his decision to stick around ended up being meaningless. He did not care about anything else, as long as he could make sure that the life of Natsumi Schwartz, the poster child of war, had been terminated. It would be. Todd, oi, you've got to be kidding me. In the instant Arakia was going to kill Natsumi, Todd's sincere hope was shattered just as something flashed above his tunnel vision, while he was focusing on letting that decisive moment go unmissed. A flash of red light separated Natsumi and Arakia. It both majestically challenged Arakia and sheltered Natsumi behind her back, as though it seemed to be the absolute strongest thing in the world. The moment he saw this, the balance in Todd's mind tipped significantly. Jamal, what was that thing that just fell from the sky? A flying dragon. Where's the flying dragon? Todd. Jamal, are you listening to me, Todd? What about us? Shouldn't we be backing General First Class Arakia? Hey! Listen to me. Todd, shut up, Jamal. Jamal, whose voice roughened at the change in the situation, gasped at Todd's words. Without acknowledging Jamal any further, Todd kept his gaze on the scene in the city hall. The woman in the crimson dress who had suddenly appeared was facing Arakia head-on. He knew at a glance. That woman also belonged to the side of the haves, far removed from normal people. Natsumi, having managed to survive what seemed to be a desperate situation, made Todd keenly aware of the fact that he also had something to offer. Something he had that was different from combat power or luck. Todd. Before the red woman intervened, Arakia alone would have been enough to make up the difference. However, the situation had changed, and no resolution was in sight. Would the weight of Todd and Jamal be enough to tip the scales back in their direction? Jamal, Todd. Todd, don't move, Jamal. There's nothing you can do right now. The odds were against them, and the longer Todd watched, the worse it got. Todd knew Jamal's anger was getting the better of him, but it would be a waste of time to act now. After all. Todd, because General First Class Arakia has been defeated just now. The red woman's blade had struck her in the back, and Arakia had fallen helplessly to the ground. The balance was broken, and it would never tilt the other way again. Todd. Arakia collapsed, and the situation in the city hall came to its terminus. This time, the fortress city of Garel had completely fallen into the hands of the enemy. There was no way to recover from this. The second ranked of the 9 divine generals had just been defeated, and there was no way that other reinforcements would come rushing in. The 9 divine generals were mighty warriors, the pinnacle of the Valachian Empire's military might. The strength of each of the 9 divine generals was equivalent to a sizable army. There was no chance that the Empire would dispatch 2 or 3 actual large armies to deal with a single situation. This was the end. The balance had been tipped. The only thing left to do was to find a way to deal with the withdrawal that would come next. Todd, what to do next? In the shadows of the building from which he had watched the developments at the city hall, Todd pondered quietly. In all honesty, he was seething with a mixture of anger and frustration, but letting it out would not solve anything. Now that the reason for his return was gone, the smart thing to do would be to get the hell out of there. However, Jamal, oi, Todd, you bastard, you're not planning to run away, are you? The search for any words with which Jamal would be persuaded had been fruitless, the latter with a blue vein popping from his forehead. Initially, convincing Jamal had been painstaking, even right after the fall, as of the moment the flag of the city hall had been burned. And yet, back then, it had been easy to guide Jamal's emotions still. Reluctant as he was, Todd had still managed to make him obey, and he had reluctantly put away his half-drawn swords. However, this was not the case this time, where things had repeated themselves, where now he'd let Jamal draw his sheathed blades once again. Even if Todd told him to put away his blades and turn around quietly again, he would not listen. In fact, depending on what was said next, he might turn the point of the blade he pulled out against Todd. If that happened, there would be no reason to not kill Jamal. His future brother-in-law. killing him would be the least favored path. If he were not brought back safely as well, keeping the promise that had been made would not be possible. Todd, let's go with that. Jamal, Todd, I understand how you feel. But you need to calm down. Now that General First Class Arakia has been defeated, there's no chance for us to win even if we go in. Do you want to make your sister sad by dying in vain? Jamal. An attempt to persuade him using the love of family as a shield. As soon as he stared at his opponent, hoping that this would work, an arm quietly stretched out and grabbed him by the scruff of his shirt. Then, with a grunt, the one-eyed Jamal bared his fangs as he drew Todd toward his face. Jamal, hey, if you think I'm gonna back off anytime you mention Katia, you're definitely wrong. Todd, I see. Too bad. Shaking his head loosely, Todd announced his disappointment rather sincerely. If it made Jamal feel any better to get a couple of hits in on him, Todd would allow it, but it seemed Jamal possessed no intention of doing that, as he instead clicked his tongue and pushed Todd away. There didn't seem to be any need for him to be so direct with things, but there was no way to stop him. As it was, Todd turned to face Jamal, and thought about climbing over the wall of the citadel on his own. Fortunately, he had already grasped the geography of the city back when they were trying to find any secret paths. Though Arakia had not achieved her goal, she too had managed to create some confusion. In fact, it would be easier to escape than before Arakia's arrival. Apparently, Jamal would be making one more rampage to get himself noticed. Todd, Jamal, I'm sorry, but I'm leaving. I'll say it again, but you probably won't listen, you'll die a dog's death. Even if you go in there, you won't be able to kill them all. Jamal, you dumbass. I'm not gonna do something so worthless. I'm going to rescue General First Class Arakia. Todd, what? He had expected meaningless sentimentality, however, the other had blurted out some unexpected words instead. Todd stopped in his tracks and stared at Jamal's face, from whom slurred out a what? Jamal, did you really think I was gonna charge in with the resolve to die? Todd, yes, I did. I thought you wanted to die like a dog. Jamal, cut the crap. I'm taking advantage of your clever thinking, but I've got a brain to think for myself too. I can tell the difference between what I can and can't do. Jamal seriously surprised Todd with his unexpected statement. There were some accomplishments to be seen in his wartime experience, but other than that, he was so direct and unsophisticated that Todd thought him to be a man unknowing of what thinking was supposed to be. Jamal, it can't be helped if you're a coward. I guess Katia wasn't a good judge of character. I'm gonna rescue the General First Class. She's got a nice ass. Todd, wait, I'm coming with you. Jamal, oh. Don't tell me, you're not satisfied with Katia's ass. Todd, I had no intention of going along with your suicidal mission, but if it isn't one, then it becomes a different story. Not dealing with the disgraceful allegations, Todd sealed Jamal's mouth with his palm. Forcing him to shut up, Todd assembled a schedule of actions that followed the change of plans in his mind. It was not in Todd's nature to do things in the spur of the moment in the first place. Sadly, however, the more time he spent with Jamal, the more experience he gained in the field of improvisation. If Jamal was going to die an honorable death on his own to retake the city hall, he would have left him alone. But if his goal was to retake Arakia, that was a different story. Todd. The situation in City Hall was slowly clearing up. The only things to watch out for were Natsumi and the Red Woman. It would be suicide to take action in their presence. However, it did not mean that their enemy had been able to resolve the situation unscathed either. If they forgot to maintain vigilance, there would be an opportunity to take advantage of. Jamal, I'm gonna go in and make a scene. If we take advantage of that opportunity and rescue the General First Class. Todd, I was impressed earlier, but that's all gone now. There are two people we need to be wary of. You must avoid doing anything around them. What, there's no need to worry. Todd's lips loosened as he looked at Jamal from the gap between his fingers, as he chided him for this barbaric distraction. He poked his white canine tooth with the tip of his tongue and smirked. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Arakia being taken, even though she was dying. If she was not dead, there was a way to get her out. It was easy to sneak into the city hall. After all, it was where they had been headquartered, even if it had been for a short time. Todd usually had a habit of grasping the geography and layout of any place he stopped by even once. He did not feel safe unless he had an idea of where to run or hide. That was why, after the camp in the Budheim jungle had been burnt down and he entered Garrel, he visited every part of the city, including City Hall, and constructed a mental map. He knew where to kill unnoticed, and where to hide to avoid detection. No matter where and what kind of threats they would encounter, he always had a way to murder, and a way to escape. Todd, 5. As he snuck inside the city hall, he crushed a few watchmen here and there. Standing guard were not the imperial soldiers nor the people of Shadrach, rather, that task went to guards of the local government that had been conducting the security of the city. They had been called in as soldiers by the disturbing elements who had caused the city to fall, though no longer could the fence-sitters they'd used be called a fine rebel army. Jamal, I ain't gonna show you any mercy at all. Jamal spat in annoyance as he snapped a sentinel's neck backward in a two-handed grip. Jamal was prouder of being an imperial soldier than of being imperial nobility. His anger towards the guards cooperating with the rebels that were fighting against the empire was immeasurable. They had been cooperating with the imperial soldiers before the fall of the city, so it was understandable that he would be angry at how quickly they had changed their tune. Todd, well, that's not a way of thinking I have. He only killed them because he had to, and if it were not required, he would not have done so. They could not be blamed for switching sides so quickly if they were just following the stronger side to survive. Of course, they had to pay for their wrong decision with their life. So, the pair made up of Jamal and himself proceeded to their destination while eliminating the guards in their path. There was a prison in the basement of the city hall, and it was customary for criminals awaiting trial by the city mayor to be placed there. It was highly likely that Arakia, having been taken prisoner, would likewise be held captive there. Naturally, an iron cell was no better than a cage made of sugar against someone from the 9 divine generals, but even so, they could not just be giving all the hospitality of a guest room. Todd might have done the same as well. Jamal, there she is, the general first class. In the underground space downstairs, several cells were placed on both sides of the hall. The lesser criminals were placed in order from the front, while the most dangerous ones were securely at the far end. Naturally, the cell at the far end, where Arakia was kept, was heavily guarded. Unlike before, the person standing in front of it was not a guard, but a Shadrachian woman. She was a large woman with yellow-dyed hair, and he could tell with just a glance that she was very skilled. In addition, due to the layout, it was impossible to reach Arakia's cell without being detected by the woman. In other words, Jamal, I guess that's the end of our little sneaking around. Todd, why do you look so happy? It was hard to understand Jamal's happy attitude when an inevitable battle was imminent. Todd's desire was to avoid killing, and he did not want to fight if he could help it. If both were inevitable, he would choose the easier and less dangerous way. Yet Jamal looked as if he enjoyed jumping into danger. He was probably thinking that the more dangerous it was, the more blood he would shed, and the more loyalty he would show to the Empire. Jamal, it's obvious, ain't it? Fight like an Imperial soldier and win the war. Only then can I be proud to say that I'm an Imperial soldier. Todd. Jamal, oi, what are you surprised about? Todd, no, it was almost exactly what I thought it'd be. It was rare to find a person whose words and deeds were so consistent. Jamal looked uncomfortable at Todd's answer, but quickly shook his head. Then he traced his fingers through his stubble and snorted. Jamal, ah. Well then, you're the one who's having second thoughts, ain't you? Todd, I can't go along with a suicide mission. If it's not that, I'll think about it. So I'm not having second thoughts. Jamal, you were trying to escape, but you didn't. Todd, I decided to bring back a souvenir while on the run. The plan hasn't changed. Jamal, you say this, and you say that, hook. Jamal gritted his teeth angrily, his eye bloodshot. With that look on his face, Todd detached his attention from him and focused on the target at hand. The woman's standing guard was thick, and her limbs were protected by a reasonable amount of flesh. Given a Shadrachian's athletic ability, even Todd's axe might not be able to dice even one of her limbs. Inevitably, then, the sweet spot would be from the neck up. There were options of smashing her head, decapitating her, or splitting her face, but... Jamal, this is where I come in, ain't it? With that, Jamal foolishly stepped forward. Todd wondered for a moment if he should call him off, but in the end he said nothing. In fact, the best move would be to push Jamal into action, get her attention, and then proceed from there. It would save a lot of time and trouble, and if he was willing to do it, there was no need to discourage him. Holly, who are you? Jamal, do I gotta answer that? You people have defiled the sword wolf of the Valachian Empire. Don't you dare think you've won in a battlefield I wasn't in. Holly, a strange guy's here. Looking at Jamal, who had advanced into the hall, the Shadrachian woman held a large spear at her side. On the other hand, Jamal, who was facing her, drew his twin swords and danced with a maniacal smile on his face. Jamal had his fair share of problems, but his abilities were renowned. At the very least, as long as his opponent was a single member of the Shadrach, he would not fall short. Jamal, take this. And this. And this. Holly, hook! You're a strong guy. The raging twin swords slashed toward the Shadrakian woman countless times while Jamal barked in a loud voice. The woman sidestepped them with her spear handling, but she was on the defensive. She must be someone with a certain level of skill to keep an eye on Arakia. However, it seemed she had not expected anyone to show up to retake their prisoner as soon as she was placed in confinement. Additionally, the lack of reliable troops was also a critical flaw for the rebels. Todd, nevertheless, they're not useful assets at the moment. Moistening his lips with his tongue, Todd leapt out from behind Jamal and jumped straight toward the cell, passing by the two of them as they fiercely clashed weapons, sparks flying. Holly, ah! His comrade. Kia. Jamal, do you have time to look around? Ah. With the assistance of an unusually witty Jamal, Todd slammed his axe into the lock of the cell with all his might. There was no time to look for the key. He could not destroy the cell, but he could at least break the lock. There was a dull sound and a stiff response as the tip of the axe cracked loudly. But instead, the lock of the cell broke with a flourish, and Todd jumped in past the creaking door. Todd, General First Class Arakia. Inside the cell, a girl lay face down upon a simple bed. Even if they belonged to the same Imperial Army, a mere soldier would not have many opportunities to meet a general. Even a general third class was a commander of an army. A general second class, let alone a general first class, would be something from above the clouds. Therefore, this was the first time that Todd had seen one of the generals first class, one of the 9 divine generals, up close. Arakia. The reason why the unconscious Arakia was lying on her face was because of the slash she had sustained on her back, covered with a painful scar which had been scorched shut on top of that. The wound had been cauterized at the same time it had been received, becoming a horrible scar. If she had not been injured by a scorching blade, she would not have gotten this kind of wound. Todd, that red woman, what did she? That woman was no ordinary person, and the power of that ornate sword she held was also extraordinary. There were no further details, and Arakia did not answer when called. So Todd had no choice but to pick up Arakia's body, then running straight out of the cell. Todd, I got her. Jamal, let's go. Holly, I'm not going to let you. Ouch. Jamal, that's why. Looking away again. Don't you dare. Nay, hook. The Shadrakian woman's mind was momentarily distracted as Arakia was taken away. In a moment, Jamal jumped at the woman like a flash with his twin swords. She immediately held her large spear vertically to prevent it, but the impact ripped the spear from the woman's grasp, and Jamal's backward kick pierced her unguarded torso as he sprung up. The woman let out a small scream as her body slammed into the wall of the prison, her head hit the ground with force, and she fell motionlessly limp. Looking over at her, Todd was about to order Jamal to finish her, but... Todd, hey, there's a commotion upstairs. Did they find the body of the guard? Jamal, TCH, we can't stay around. The general first class is... Todd, she's unconscious, but not dead. That should be enough. Answering Jamal's question in a straightforward manner, Todd ran out of the dungeon. Jamal, who was ahead of him, was in charge of clearing the way for Todd, who easily overtook him. Who in the world? Gua! Jamal, out of the way, you dim-witted bastards! The guard who looked into the basement was blown away by a slash, and Todd ran through the city hall behind Jamal as they became increasingly alert. Unfortunately, he did not have the leisure of caring for Arakia's body as he carried her. If she was one of the 9 divine generals, her body would probably be strong enough. He just had to trust his endurance and run. Jamal, we're outside. Where are we going? Todd, main gates closed. Follow me. Stitching their way through the dark and tumultuous night of the city, Todd jumped into the back alleys with Jamal. He made full use of the narrow streets and side roads to mislead the enemies, tracking their whereabouts. The battle had just ended, the chaos was still raging, and there were at least 300 identically dressed Imperial soldiers in the city. It would be difficult to tell them apart. All that was left was... Todd, hook! The moment he heard the sound of wind, a blade swung right behind Todd. He turned around, and there stuck just right below his feet was a single, thick, large arrow. Someone had cut it down. It had been aimed at Todd, carrying insane momentum, and Jamal had been the one to swiftly deal with it. That had been a precise shot, aimed at the two who were running and hiding in the city. It was, beyond the shadow of doubt, the same archer who had shot Todd in the torso a few days prior. They were being observed. If that were the case, they could not move carelessly. If they left the alley, that would make them an easy target, and Todd, with Arakia in tow, would have difficulty moving with agility. Even if they tried to kill the archer, the enemy was located at the city hall and there would be no option but to return there for the third time. So, should they abandon Arakia and flee? That would be the way most likely to save themselves, but if that was the case, they would not know what they were risking their lives for to begin with. In light of the current situation, he searched for an optimal way to take action, and the one that would yield the most results was Todd, Jamal, you know we're being targeted. Jamal, yeah, they're a pain in the ass. They're too far away for me to kill them, but if we don't, they'll just shoot at us one way or another. What should we do? Todd, then, there's only one way. Jamal narrowed his single eye at Todd's words. To Jamal's gaze that sought a solution, Todd exhaled deeply and closed one eye. Todd, as soon as we jump out, the enemy's going to shoot at us. I'll have you get ahead of me and cut off their arrows just like before. Not just one shot, but 2 or 3 will follow. I'll run as fast as I can so I don't shake the general first class off. Jamal, huh, that doesn't sound like you. That's really your move? Smells of desperation, no? Todd, ultimately, that's what happens when you run out of cards. But I'm still lucky, aren't I? Jamal, huh? What do you mean? Todd, you got a pretty strong hand left, you know. The strategy he presented was almost entirely based on Jamal's swordsmanship. If Jamal were incapable of cutting off the flying arrows, they would both perish. It was insane, given Todd's beliefs, to risk his life in such a reckless manner. However, that was his suggestion. With Jamal's swordsmanship, the odds were not null. Jamal, I knew Katia wasn't a good judge of character. I thought you were smarter than that. Todd, don't talk bad about my fiancé, Oniai-sama. Todd replied to Jamal, scratching his head, his cheeks twisted. Hearing this, Jamal let out a short ha, and then gripped the hilts of his twin swords once again. Then, turning his imposing back to Todd. Jamal, I'm in. Sometimes a stupid bet ain't so bad. Todd, if I wasn't here, you'd probably be making all those types of bets. Jamal, shut the hell up. Shut up and stay behind my back. Jamal's spirits quietly rose as they exchanged hateful words. Watching his back, Todd tightened his hold on Arakia's body. Todd, Jamal, when you get out of the alley, run straight. After that, when you get to the end, take the right road. That should give you enough time to catch your breath. Hearing these instructions, Jamal pondered on them in his head, slowly closed his eye, then reopened it as he stepped forward. Jamal, hook. As soon as he stepped out of the alley, a single arrows, clad in a gale, pierced toward Jamal. Jamal responded to it with amazing reflexes, and cut it off with a clash of his twin swords. The impact bounced onto Jamal's wrist, and his clenched teeth chattered as he laughed like a rabid dog. The sensation of blood burning, heart leaping, and life boiling overtook Jamal. His extreme concentration made the world retard, and he felt as if he could feel every drop of sweat that ran down his skin, every grain of sand that flew around, and even the existence of air that should have been invisible. Jamal, haha. One after another, a storm of arrows poured down like a deluge. Stepping on the ground, swinging his sword as if dancing, slicing the arrows and striking them down. What ensued was a sword dance, the sword dance of Jamal or Ali. If things had gone well, they would have been able to enjoy the dance of the dancer who had been invited to the city hall the following day. Jamal laughed at the thought that it had been ruined, and that he was the one dancing instead. But it was a dance with all his heart, a dance with all his body, a sword fight with all his energy. Todd likewise marveled at Jamal's efforts as he furiously handled the attack. Todd followed without raising his voice, as a storm of lethal arrows rained down on him. This was a sign that he knew that if Jamal were distracted, it would directly lead to his death. So Todd pushed Jamal away from his consciousness and focused all his energy on avoiding the impending death. Straight ahead, evade, strike off, step in, jump, dispel, and cut open. Jamal, end of the CRR hook. Miraculously, they had finished the straight path of death and hit the end of the indicated path. The passage of time was vague, and the sword dance must have only lasted several seconds, even if it felt like it had persisted for hours. However, they had only broken through the first barrier. Refusing to relax, Jamal did as he was told and turned right at the end of the road, where? At the end of the broken path, there stood a group of Shadrakians, their spears trained on them. Jamal, fuck. It would be difficult to handle that many Shadrakians with that archer aiming at them. One could say it was impossible. He was prepared to fight hard until he ran out of steam, but even if he did, he could not set any of it in reserve. He had no idea that he would be so perfectly anticipated, and it seemed that luck had completely abandoned him. Jamal, even if you strut around being all sorts of a smartass, in the end, luck'll run out on you, huh? Heh, it's in vain. but it wasn't all that bad. Checking the feel of the twin swords in his bloodied hands, Jamal spilled this out to Todd behind him. It wasn't bad at all, he had said, and he meant it. In many ways, Todd's thoughts and actions had been overwhelming and frustrating. In the end, however, he chose to exert himself like an Imperial soldier. Jamal, I'm sorry about Katia, but it can't be helped. She's part of Imperial nobility as well. I'm sure she was prepared for this to happen to you and me. Thinking of the sister he had left behind in the Imperial capital, Jamal felt a faint tingle in his chest. However, it was soon drowned out by the will to fight the enemy in front of him and the smell of blood that coated everything. He was relieved for that. He was, to the bone, a sword wolf of the Valachian Empire. Jamal, let's do this, Todd. Let's at least show them what we're made of, for one last time. Leaning forward, Jamal licked the blood flowing from his eye-patch-covered right eye. Then, fiercely, he jumped headlong into the enemy, as to display his final prestige as an Imperial soldier. Deadly attacks rained down on him like a storm, but he no longer held any regrets. The fact that he had been able to be himself till the very end had been the greatest prize for Jamal. You were an idiot until the very end, weren't you? Hearing Jamal's fierce roar in the distance, Todd muttered so as he dove through the wall. The hole he had passed through was collapsed immediately afterwards, and he carefully erased all traces of his presence, so that he could not be pursued. They in the city would probably be occupied with Jamal for a while, so there should be time to escape. It was just like Jamal had stated. Todd would never entrust his life to a desperate plan, even if he were dead. No, he would never do such a thing, precisely to avoid dying. Todd, if I let them chase you out of the alley, they'll be distracted. Well, I feel sorry for Katia. The promise to bring back his brother-in-law would go unfulfilled, and his fiancée would be terribly heartbroken. In order to comfort her, he wished to return to the Imperial capital as soon as possible. Fortunately, in return for losing Jamal, he had been able to find another way to return to the Imperial capital. It was a wildcard that could lead to a much bigger foothold than Jamal's current one, which was that he had been on the verge of promotion to General Third Class. Arakia, Princess. Todd, oh dear, you look so innocent. Even so, if you're one of the 9 divine generals, then the number of people you've killed would be more than 100 or 2. In Todd's arms, Arakia's tears flowed from her closed eye. As he watched the tears roll down her cheeks, the vague thought that his current companion was wearing an eye patch, just like his previous one, passed Todd's mind. After thinking about it, Todd suddenly inclined his head. Anne. Todd, on which side did Jamal have that eye patch? Chapter 28, Victory Conditions. The news that the captured Arakia had been taken sent a tremor through the conference hall. Kuna, what a disgrace. Even Holly's bow couldn't catch up to him, they got away. Holly, right. The two people who hung their heads and apologized were Holly, who held a bow in her hand, and Kuna. With Holly, the bearer of bad news, alongside her, Kuna had immediately gone up to the top floor to chase after the runaway, Arakia. Then, using a combination of Holly's arm strength and Kuna's eyesight, they had fired at the fugitives, just as they had done with Todd when Subaru and the others had originally escaped Garrel. However, the fugitives had been able to deal with the two-man long-range snipe, and successfully outmaneuvered the both of them, taking Arakia away. Kuna, one of them stayed behind as a decoy, and the other one took the Divine General. We can't let it end like this, we have to go after them. And, it is pointless. The frustrated Kuna, her nose wrinkled in regret, had her words interrupted by two voices. The same exact words were uttered simultaneously by both Abel and Priscilla, sitting motionlessly at the round table. The two glanced at each other, and Priscilla closed her eyes. It was a sign that she wanted to hand it over to Abel. Abel, it was a way to get behind our lines with a small number of people, achieve a singular goal, and escape. The two had their roles clearly defined in case they got split up. Their courage in deciding to do it, and the judgment to escape, are worthy of appraisal. They shall not be caught even if someone is sent to chase them. Kuna, hook, but even so. Abel, in less than half a day, Arakia shall wake up. If that happens, any pursuers we send her way will not pose a chance. And if they change their mind and return to the city, it shall also be futile. Let me tell you, we shall not have the same luck twice. At the very least, I would state that it would be quite reckless to make a stand with our current forces. Kuna, Guh, hook. Holly, Kuna. What Abel's saying is right. By rattling off a string of words, Abel tried to discourage Kuna's insistence. Holly, standing beside her, gently patted Kuna on the shoulder as if to offer some consolation. Being a representative of the chieftain at the round table, and confident in her archery skills, Kuna must have felt bitterly disappointed. However, despite his harsh way of putting it, Subaru nodded in agreement with Abel's argument. The Imperial soldiers who had invaded the prison would not have dared to challenge them without a chance of winning. They had set an objective that was achievable under their circumstances, found a way to beat the odds, and executed it. Naturally, they would not do anything half-hearted like a one-way trip, so they must have had an appropriate plan for escape. Priscilla, no matter how you spin it, that thing's fate did not end here. With that as the case, I am sure it has a role to play still. Subaru, Priscilla. Priscilla casually threw those words into the air upon the fall of silence. For Subaru, who had been discussing the treatment of Arakia just before, his feelings about her not being executed and having been taken away without being able to talk to her were complex. But what did Priscilla, who had taken the stance of staying out of Arakia's life and death, think of her being taken? That could not be read from her crimson eyes. Al, so, in the end, what are we gonna do about that girl, Arakia? Have you decided to leave her be? Subaru, if she's been taken away, there's nothing else we can do. With a pained look on his face, Subaru responded to Ael's words, who was incapable of reading the mood. Having managed to deal with Kuna's and Holly's sniping, they could not expect anyone with only half-decent skill to take pursuit of the fugitives. In that case, this limited who they could choose for the pursuit, and all of those with good skills could not be permitted to be absent from Geralt at the moment. Despite all his efforts to come up with a solution, Subaru's strength lay in surprise attacks, which made him particularly ill-suited to occasions in which his opponent took the initiative. And this state of affairs made that clear. Subaru, by the way, I don't think it's likely, but what if they're still hiding in the city, pretending to have escaped? Zikr, I do not think so. Although the city is claimed to be solidly fortified, there are other secret paths besides the two large gates, but all of them have been meticulously closed off in the past few days. Subaru, meticulously. Zikr, yes. We were expecting you to use the secret passages to infiltrate the city. We certainly did not believe that you would attempt a reckless plan to break through from the front. He had been caught flat-footed, but Zikr responded calmly without a trace of displeasure. As the commander-in-chief of the fortress city, it was a matter of course to be wary of any secret pathways. However, the defensive stance taken under Zikr's leadership lent a tailwind to the soldiers who had taken Arakia and fled. Zikr, perhaps the soldiers who took the general first class were part of the search party for the secret paths. As Abel Dano said, they are not amongst those who would take up a challenge without a prospect of victory. That being the case, I wonder if they were able to do it because they knew there was a way out. Subaru, isn't it possible to find the location of the paths you eliminated on a map? Zikr. It would be possible to make a map, but not right now. The city has fallen and the soldiers are very shaken. This chaos will not settle anytime soon. Subaru. If only this were a game, it'd be that easy. Were this an act in a video game, once one got the commander of the defeated enemy to join their side, and the subordinate units would likewise ally themselves. However, reality was not a game. In a game, soldiers were represented by numbers, but each of them had a life of their own here. After mulling it over for a while, Subaru, Holly-san, are you injured? Holly, HM? Are you worried about me? Natsumi is so kind. At Subaru's inquiry, Holly threw her arms up while smiling broadly. She showed her large biceps to emphasize that she was alive and well. Holly, I'm a little banged up, but I'm not badly hurt, so I'll be fine in no time. Subaru, I see. I'm glad to hear that. But when Subaru fumbled his words and dropped his gaze, Holly put a puzzled look on her face. Noticing Subaru's inner thoughts, Kuna scratched her head with an ah. Then, Kuna, some of the guards we had standing inside the building have been killed. They were all dead, so we couldn't do anything. Subaru, some? Tell me how many? Kuna, 7 men. When asked the exact number of casualties, Kuna, even though hesitant, answered 7. The number of casualties stabbed deeply into Subaru's heart. On the top floor, Rem had been making a great deal of continuous effort to treat the Imperial soldiers and Shadrakians who had gotten injured in Arakia's attack, and they had not received any reports of deaths. They had not received those, but Subaru, how's this a bloodless siege? Brushing up his long black wig, Subaru let out a heartbreaking breath. The bloodless siege, which he had undertaken with such vigor, and which he had said he would accomplish, was supposed to succeed in bringing about the fall of Geralt without loss of life. Yet instead, it had resulted in many deaths. His promise had been broken. Even if he were accused of being a liar, he would not be able to retort. Even if no one accused Subaru of lying, Subaru would condemn himself as one despite that. Because he was the biggest liar here. A bloodless siege? Overhearing Subaru's mutterings, a voice repeated to themselves as if reflecting on those words. It was Priscilla, leaning on the round table, resting her cheek on her hand. In an unusual expression, she had slightly raised her well-shaped eyebrow and studied Subaru. With that expression on her face, Priscilla prefaced her statement with a single word, you. Priscilla, I thought I heard a very foolish thing. Did you really believe that you could bring down an entire city without shedding blood? In the middle of this war, without an overwhelming military force? Subaru, yeah, that's right, my bad. No, it was really my fault, wasn't it? After all, at the end of the day, it was my mistake. Priscilla, it was merely a stupid idea, that is what amazed me. I am astonished that you would even attempt to put that pipe dream into practice. Abel, are you insane? Abel. The plan itself was sheer madness to begin with. The question was directed at Abel, who crossed his arms and replied quietly. Subaru's proposed plan was pure madness. In fact, anyone that heard the outline would probably agree. And yet, Abel had gone along with it. Priscilla, who was apparently acquainted with him, did not seem to understand it. Priscilla, looking at the empire from the throne made you that much more lax. There is no war without sacrifice. There is no pride without bloodshed. That is the way of the empire, is it not? Abel, I have no intention of disobeying the code of the Sword Wolf. I said it was madness, but the odds were in my favor. In fact, if it weren't for Arakia's presence, the siege would have been bloodless. Priscilla. Abel, it was not the plan that went wrong. It was my judgment. Priscilla, I shall not allow even you to make a fool of my military strategist's offering. It was my decision. The blame lies with me. Subaru, oh. Abel confronted Priscilla head-on with a statement that had been far too unexpected. Abel's words and actions were clearly in defense of Subaru, even though he had been appointed to the unheard-of role of military strategist. He could not interject between the dangerous standoff of the two. Al, what's the matter, bro? He likes you an awful lot, looks like you're getting a big promotion. Subaru, my position as Emiliotan's knight and Biko's guardian's good enough for me. I don't want to be given any more positions I'm not familiar with. Subaru pushed Al away from him, and also pushed away the responsibility that was pressing down on him. However, thanks to Abel's protection, Priscilla's attention seemed to have turned in that direction. In spite of that, this did not heal the wound to Subaru's internals. The responsibility for the lives lost should be placed on Subaru, the one who had come up with and implemented the plan. Al, you can't save them all, bro. Al muttered, fiddling with the metal fittings on his helmet as he looked at Subaru's profile. When Subaru glanced at him, he turned his gaze up towards the ceiling and said, Al, you can't save all the people you get involved with. No one's stopping you from saving them, but your heart's gonna be broken while doing so. I don't recommend it. Subaru, Al. Al, we all live and die as we please. Like you said, bro, it ain't a game. It's up to them to take care of their own lives. This was the cynical attitude that Al sometimes displayed. On one hand, he was giving a sermon to Subaru on how tragic events happened and that he should accept them as is, although there seemed to be good advice and counsel there. On the other hand, it also felt like the admonishment of an obstinate child. It was a sound argument, to some degree. In fact, Al's words were right. Saving everyone and anything was not possible, and there would be no end to it if he did decide to save them all. That was why Subaru had never been able to save every last thing till this point. The sheer scale of war was different. Could he really say that his choice was correct? The number of lives that could be saved by a single action taken by Subaru did not even reach 10, much less 100. Priscilla, this is even worse than farcical, you know. While Subaru and Al were talking, Priscilla and Abel continued their standoff. To Abel, who took the blame, Priscilla pulled out a fan from her cleavage and pointed the tip of it at the conference hall, no, at the entire city. Priscilla, even in a situation in which you managed to successfully bring down the city with the help of your military strategist, you shall not be able to repeat the miracle of driving Arakia away a second time. Will that method ever work again? Abel, indeed, there shall not be a second time. Abel nodded without hesitation in response to Priscilla's question. With the mention of the method that had driven away Arakia, a thought also occurred to the frowning Subaru. There had been a moment during Al and Arakia's bout in which her behavior had become strange. Subaru, that wasn't something that Al did. Al, what? Yeah, it wasn't me. In the first place, if it were me, I would have done it a little smarter. You know, I was the one who got bounced and thrown off. Subaru, that's right. Now that he mentioned it, it had not gone down very well, even with Al's skills. The conversation between the two drew the attention of the conference hall to Abel. Only he could tell what somehow happened, and so he sniffed, being annoyed with the gathering attention. Abel, Arakia, is the spirit eater. She feeds on the spirits in the air and absorbs their power. Subaru, spirit eater. Subaru had no recollection of hearing it before, but the unsettling title made his eyes widen. He had already guessed that the Valachian Empire had different rules and a different environment compared to Kingdom of Lubunica, but the idea of a spirit eater was quite the novelty. Subaru himself was a spiritual arts user who borrowed the power of spirits, but this sounded distinctly different, and to put it simply, Subaru, I definitely don't want to bring Biko into this. Is being a spirit eater a common thing? Priscilla, no, it's not. Spirit eating was originally one of the secrets of the tribes that lived on the borderlands of Wallachia. But it was so powerful that the technique was banished, and the method to possess it lost. Abel, at least, as far as I know, there are no known spirit eaters outside of Arakia. If there had been, I would have politely protected them. That was the observers. No, it matters not, now. Not wanting the conversation to get off topic, Abel shook his head, as he encouraged them to get back to the topic at hand with returning to the main topic. Subaru, who was relieved to hear that spirit eating was not a common practice, and that Beatrice was no longer in danger of being munched on, asked. Subaru, so how did you confuse the spirit eater, Arakia? Abel, I did not confound her. I just gave her mana poisoning. Al, mana poisoning. Ah, I see. That's a very clever thing to do. Abel's answer made sense, and Al nodded admiringly as he stroked his chin. Subaru had heard of the term mana poisoning before, and then it clicked. Subaru, as I recall, it was something like, people who are hypersensitive to mana tend to get sick when they go to places where the concentration of mana is really high. Priscilla, Arakia, is susceptible to that kind of influence, due to her spirit eater characteristic. It is a prerequisite to have a reasonable level of resistance to spirits, in order to take them in. However, if you go beyond that principle and try to make Arakia sick off mana, you shall end up with. Abel, yes, she made me utilize one of my treasures. Including that which he has already used before, I hold nothing else on hand. Whilst saying that, Abel nodded towards and indicated Subaru. That made Subaru go treasure, and he tilted his head to the side whilst raising his eyebrows. Even though Abel had stated that Subaru had used one of his treasures, he honestly had no clue at all as to what he meant. Subaru, what treasure are you talking about? When did I get your? Abel, during the lifeblood ritual, you broke the ring to cleave the witch beast's horn off. That's the one. Subaru, ah. He'd lost track of it, but it brought back memories of a ring he had borrowed, which allowed him to cast magic. In the throes of battle, he had no choice but to hit the Elgina's horn with said ring, shattering it and snapping the witchbeast's horn, leaving Subaru's arm and the ring in shambles. And something else that was mentioned in the same breath, was what Abel had made use of in the fight with Arakia? Abel, as I dropped from the balcony, I shattered the ring I had hidden. It took a while for the mana it contained to flood the area around it, but... Al, so that Arakia girl was like that because she got mana poisoning. Oh come on, I got my ass kicked by that girl. Subaru, did you pull that little trick at that moment? Even though they were all in a battered and wounded state, Subaru tipped his hat off to Abel's unwillingness to give up. That he was still searching for a way to win even though he was being cornered by the second strongest ranking general in the Empire was admirable. Subaru's resilience was quite good, but his intelligence was so far removed from Abel's that he could not get over the difference between a bad move and a desperate counterattack. In any case, Subaru, isn't this an original plan prepared specifically for Arakia? It's very bold of you to prepare such a plan when you didn't know she would be going against you. Abel, the more people one keeps close, the more one must prepare for the time of their betrayal. Arakia in particular, I never knew when Arakia would turn against me. Priscilla, however, you only get one chance to use your wiles. It is not easy to procure enough magic stones to give a person mana poisoning. It shall be essential to secure a decent fighting force before the next time around. But, having declared that much, Priscilla cut off her words meaningfully. Covering her mouth with her fan, Priscilla narrowed her crimson eyes at Abel. With a somewhat probing, testing look in her eyes, she let out a small breath and... Priscilla, adding the people of Shadrach to your ranks was expected. However, it is difficult to see how you could be foolish enough to adopt a naive military strategist's plan for a bloodless siege of the fortress city. Abel. Priscilla, at this rate, I shall never be able to advise my collaborators to support you. Subaru, collaborators. Subaru was astonished by Priscilla, who had said it in a matter-of-fact and natural way. It was not just Subaru who was surprised, but everyone in the conference hall except Abel and Al. Aside from Priscilla's companion, Al, it seemed unreasonable that Abel was also not surprised, but Subaru opted to not mention it. Subaru, wait, this is going all over the place. Collaborators. In the first place, I don't understand your position. I heard that you came to help Abel, but... Priscilla, I am not here to lend aid. Do not listen seriously to the ramblings of my clown. Subaru, I get it. I don't care if you've come to help Abel or not. That's not the point. What I want to hear is your ultimate goal. As they heard, the immediate subgoal was to have some dialogue with Abel. However, what Subaru desired to know was why Priscilla, why her, Al, and possibly the other collaborators they had brought alongside them, were in the Valachian Empire to begin with. On top of that, it would be best if he knew whether they were willing to side with Abel or not. Subaru, answer me. Honestly, I and everyone else here aren't sure what to think of you. Priscilla, that is hubris at its finest. I do not care what you plebeians think of me. I shall do what I wish to do. After all. Subaru, the world is made to suit you, isn't it? Priscilla gave a snort at Subaru's tracing of her philosophy, which was familiar to his ears. Then, noticing the increased number and sharpness of the glances directed at her, Priscilla shut one eye. Priscilla, my aim is to restore the Emperor to the throne he was ousted from. If I do not, I shall be receiving a constant stream of annoying visitors. Abel, it goes without mentioning that those assassins were not dispatched by me. Priscilla, I did not even suspect it. Henceforth, I took the trouble to arrive here. Or, it would be more accurate to say that I had my wings carry me. With one eye closed, Priscilla answered Abel and turned her gaze upward. Without the ceiling present, what could be observed was the night sky beyond. More to the point, it was not just the sky, but an existence that made the sky its own. Subaru, no way, did you and Al just fly in from the sky? Al, oh, it's like a flying dragon express service. To be honest, I thought it'd be the end of the world when the princess jumped off by herself. I certainly couldn't follow, so I couldn't get down until it lowered itself a bit. Subaru, a flying dragon. The water dragons in Pre-Stella scared the hell out of me. In addition to the water dragon, which was a fantasy creature aside than the ground dragon, the existence of flying dragons surfaced. From what he had heard, flying dragons were extremely ferocious and required specialized skills to be tamed. Since their tamers capable of that were not numerous, being able to ride a flying dragon in the first place was a rare thing. Subaru, in other words, the person who can provide a flying dragon express delivery is a collaborator of Priscilla's? Priscilla, do not perform lowly deeds such as picking apart people's words. In your case, your lowliness outweighs your cleverness. Polish up your pretty face. You are still capable of looking good if you fix your makeup. Subaru, if I fix my makeup now I'd definitely be a crazy person, right? Now that she mentioned it, the fact that he had not been able to shed his womanly attire thus far might be regarded as a problem, but the people present here could read the atmosphere, so they did not touch the issue. Anyway, he was getting way off track again, however. Subaru, if the goal is to get Abel back on the throne, does that mean we can cooperate with each other? Priscilla, in truth, I cannot give you a straightforward assent. I have not forgotten my earlier words. If he does not possess the qualities of an emperor, there will be no point in bringing him back. Abel glared at Priscilla, his gaze sharpened as he was questioned about his own qualities as an emperor to his face. What Priscilla saw as a concern was the bloodless siege proposed by Subaru and approved by Abel, not so much the failure to carry it out, but rather the problem of the idea to begin with. As per the way of Wallachia, naivete could be fatal. In fact, lives had been lost because Subaru's endgame had been naive. Her disapproval was irrefutable. However, Abel, I shall reclaim the throne. No matter what anyone says, that much is certain. Priscilla, no matter what you may state, that much remains indisputable. With Subaru having fallen silent, Abel took his place and made a strong declaration. It was the same, or perhaps an even more passionate declaration than the one he had made upon revealing his true identity and divulging that he would take back this country in front of Subaru. Priscilla. Hearing Abel's resolve, the expressions on the faces of those in the conference hall shifted. Kuna and Holly had the will to continue fighting as the people of Shadrach, while Zikr bowed his head as if he were in the presence of something divine. Al turned to Priscilla to see her reaction, while Priscilla's eyes narrowed as she continued to assert herself, undaunted. Priscilla, your spirit is undiminished, but reality is not. In fact, you have been forced to abandon your throne. Abel. Priscilla, the circumstances are already apparent. The question is, who set it in motion? Whose plan was it? Abel, I am certain sure it was Prime Minister Berstetz who brought it all to fruition. Abel answered Priscilla's question with a hint of hostility in his dark eyes. The prime minister's position was at the top of the state government, as it was closely associated with the emperor. If the pinnacle of the armed forces were a general or the head of a knightly order, then the prime minister may be said to be the pinnacle of civil services. In any case, it could be said that being second in command made it easy to carry out betrayal. Priscilla, that old tree. How dare he waste what he got from Lamia? Abel, of course, I had foreseen his rebellious intentions and prepared accordingly. But Abel broke off there and exhaled quietly. It was a reaction that was very much unlike him, the first time he had displayed anything close to fragility. As emperor, he had never wavered, even when forced to leave his position, but this was the first time he had shown a faint weakness. The cause of this weakness was not the prime minister's betrayal. Abel, with Chisha Gold watching over me, I was unable to see through the rebellious intentions of the 9 divine generals 4th rank. Zikr, ridiculous, General First Class Chisha. As Abel spat out his ashamed thoughts, Zikr was incapable of containing himself and raised his voice. Zikr, as a general 2nd class of the empire, must have been familiar with the name of this particular member of the 9 divine generals, a name that Subaru was not. Attracting the gaze of those at the round table, Zikr stroked his ample hair and spoke. Zikr, General First Class Chisha, is unique among the 9 divine generals, in terms of his capability. The General First Class himself is more famous for his wisdom than his military prowess, and he was the one who supported His Excellency Vincent the most during the imperial selection ceremony. Subaru, does that mean he was his right-hand man? You mean this guy was betrayed not only by his political right-hand man, the prime minister, but his longtime right-hand man, the general, too? Abel, do not utter those words again. My right arm is still attached to my right shoulder. Subaru, when you say that now, it just sounds like you're just trying to be tough. Listening to Zikr's explanation, Subaru was surprised by Abel's popularity, which was unexpectedly lacking. However, keeping the Empire of Valachia's radical ideology in mind, an emperor who was deemed insufficiently powerful would immediately be rebelled against, so perhaps these situations were not all that rare. Subaru, is it common for emperors to run for cover in this country? Abel, since I have been on the throne, there have only been 2 times in which I was pursued, at least formally. Subaru, but you've got a record. Abel, nonsense. It was the kingdom's royal guard who dragged me around in that previous venture. If you want to complain, you can take it up with them. He gave Subaru a seriously disappointed look. He took the hint and held his tongue. He thought that Julius had once mentioned that he had gone to the Empire as an emissary, but he had not thought it had anything to do with that. If so, the world was too small. So the emperor was chased from the throne by his confidants and aides, as well as that Arakia girl. Doesn't that sound dangerous? Don't you have an ally or something? Abel, another one of the 9 divine generals, Gaz Ralphin. He was instrumental in my escape. Were it not for him stalling for time, I would not have been able to activate the transfer mechanism. Zikr, as expected of General First Class Gaz. Abel, however, if the 9 divine generals, other than Shisha and Arakia, have 2 turned against me, I do not know how Gaz alone could have survived. It is far more likely that he was killed. The existence of any divine general who had risked their lives to protect Abel was a hope, albeit a very fleeting one. However, Zikr with a no shook his head. Zikr, if I may be so bold, I have not received any news of the death of General First Class Gaz. Whether he perished in battle or from illness, the death of a man of General First Class Gaz's status cannot be hidden for long. Abel, then there remains the possibility that he is being held captive. Zikr, perhaps. No, surely. For a warrior of the caliber of General First Class Gaz, that is likely the case. At Abel's words, Zikr bowed reverently. If he had earned this kind of respect from Zikr, then this Gaz must be a very reliable man. Or maybe a woman, contrary to the stern name. Priscilla, with the Prime Minister and the 9 divine generals as foes, the Empire is very much a place of certain death. Priscilla, who had finished listening to the conversation before interjecting uselessly, muttered that. In agreement with her words, Subaru raised his hand, and... Subaru, hey. I know it's a tad late, but what if Abel comes forward as the emperor? That way, the people who are quietly running the government in the imperial capital can be branded as rebels and traitors. Unfortunately, it's impossible to expect an angry populace and soldiers to kill the administration's coup d'etat before the battle even starts, bro. Subaru, I wasn't thinking something that crazy, but why not? Abel, because this is the Valachian Empire, where the powerful are respected. Subaru's suggestion was rejected, and Al's words were supplemented by Abel's. The emperor, removed from his throne, folded his arms, his shapely eyebrows slightly furrowed. Abel, if I come forward and announce my intention to reclaim the imperial capital myself, I would be welcomed. But that does signify that they shall support me. What was taken from you, you must take back yourself. That is how it is. Subaru, not only goods and lands, but also the emperor's throne. Abel, there are no exceptions. Therefore, I know what must be done. Subaru, who was attempting to wrap his head around the situation, was surprised by Abel's words. Just when he thought he was at a loss, Abel's answer was rather the opposite. He stood up and slowly put his hands on the round table. Anne. Abel, General Second Class Zikr, the map. Zikr, yes. Right away. When told to do so, Zikr sent instructions to the imperial soldiers waiting in the corner of the room. They immediately peeled off the map hanging on the wall of the conference hall, and moved to spread it out atop the round table. It was a world map showing, well, the entire world, including Wallachia. Abel, here we are, in the east, at the fortress city of Geralt. And the imperial capital of Lupagana, which must be reclaimed, is roughly in the center of the empire. Subaru, Wallachia is pretty big. The map showed Subaru the size of the country, which he had not been aware of till now. The Wallachian Empire, which occupied the southern portion of the world map, was the largest when compared to the other countries. The Budheim jungle, which had posed so much trouble for Subaru and the others to get through, was merely a small geographic area from the perspective of the whole of Wallachia. Abel, each city in the empire is controlled by its own mayor or lord. As is the case with Geralt, each of these cities possesses its own autonomous military force and shall not hesitate to fight in case of an emergency. We shall add these to our forces and secure the strength required to retake the imperial capital. Subaru, I get this as a pattern of kingship and a conquering simulation. Abel, you seem to be displeased. Subaru, of course. It was an enormous undertaking just for Geralt. I don't think it's going to keep working out this way. Pointing to the map, Subaru had managed to keep up with Abel as he explained. He could manage to keep up with him, but this was a matter of logic, not emotion. As stated earlier, this was not a game. There was no way that a method that held water when it came to simulation RPGs and things of the sort would be easily applied in actual reality. Abel's opinion seemed to be quite optimistic. Nevertheless, Abel, there is a way to dispel your concerns. Rather, there are essential conditions that must be met in order to do what I must. Subaru, essential conditions. Abel, by securing divine generals. Upon hearing that reply, Subaru's eyes went wide. That was natural. After all, Abel had just told them that he had been expelled from throne because of the 9 divine generals' treachery. Those of the 9 divine generals that favored him were unaccounted for, and the 2 members of the 9 divine generals they were aware of were already enemies. As for the others, Subaru, what about the other divine generals? Abel, there. Abel pointed a finger at the sudden question and nodded at Subaru's agitation. Then, he surveyed the faces of everyone except Subaru. Abel, the people of the empire are strong. The 9 divine generals are the incarnation of this rule. In other words, if one wishes to be the supreme ruler of the Wallachian Empire, you must unite the 9 divine generals. Subaru, so, in other words. After Abel's words, Subaru's eyes widened as he realized what was to follow. Abel's cheeks twisted at Subaru's reaction, as he smiled belligerently. And then, Abel, the Blue Lightning, Cecilus Segmunt. The Spirit Eater, Arakia. The Vicious Old Man, Albert Dunkelkin. The White Spider, Shisha Gold. The Lion Knight, Gaz Ralphin. The Master of Enchanted Items, Groovy Gumlet. The Flamboyant, Yorna Mishigyr. The Steelman, Maguro Hagain. The Flying Dragon General, Madeline Eschart. Subaru. Abel, the winner of this battle shall be the one who recruits the most divine generals. That is the path toward triumph, and that is the absolute condition I must fulfill. End of chapters 27 and 28, Victory Conditions.